A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 57. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hello.
Star Wars talk.
Hello.
I know.
Yep.
We were back. We were off last week for people that are in the know or not in the know, and so it's a strange time. We're getting back in the Star Wars.
Turned out to be fine. I think there wasn't a ton going on last week in Star Wars.
No, and to be perfectly honest, there's not a lot going on this week. We definitely have an outline and that we can talk about, and we're going to do that. But I will say that when you're getting to the point where I see other podcasts, Star Wars podcasts, go, yeah, we've got nothing really. We're going to do a show. We got nothing, I'm not throwing shade on anybody, but it's like I kind of was watching some Star Wars programming where it was some of the high-end or more high-end stuff, and even they were kind of struggling to have enough.
Some of the official Star Wars programming.
Yeah, it's like they were like, oh, let's talk to these guys kind of thing. So we're kind of in this famine part of Star Wars fandom, which I surely will be fixed in
the trough of the year. I'm sure next month the Rogue One stuff's gonna start back up.
Well, when's the toys come out? They come out this month, don't they?
Later this month.
So there's gonna be what do they call it? Rogue something, or I don't even know. I'm sorry. I feel Rogue bad. Rogue Friday or something, that they're gonna have the release of the Rogue One toys at Target and.
Right,
and
I guess they're still probably gonna call it Force Friday.
Yeah, I should really just look that up, but
it's not important.
Yeah, it's anyway. But what is it called? This anyway. No, see, that's the thing. You can't even hot take it, because then if you have to click into it, yeah, it's
right.
Toys R Us will release Rogue One toys midnight on September 30th, and they call it
very end of the month.
Yeah, so it's going to be the 30th, and I think that's what Go Rogue is the official hashtag. And it
hashtag.
It's a hashtag, but I mean, you're not a person who buys the toys, and I haven't bought really. I bought a few things, but I'll get into some toys, some brief.
We'll talk about them when they come out, I guess.
Right. I mean,
if they come out, when they come out, we have plenty of time to get into that.
And I'm still kind of in my thing where it's like, oh, hey, I'm still really into the stuff I already have. So that's what I've been doing. But I've been like baby steps. It's so funny. I was down at my mom's place in Aberdeen, Washington, for people who are aware of the historical connections of that place, but that's where I'm from. And it's funny, there's a place down there, and it's called, and I'm giving them a free ad, so they owe us, this place called Suture and Sons, and it's a Star Wars shop, which is really strange for me, because I grew up in that town, and that's where I consumed a lot of my Star Wars stuff, but that store didn't exist. It didn't come around until I had already moved out of town. So it was like this place where I remember I went there, it started in 97. I started talking to the guy, and he says 97. And I remember going in there, and it was a pretty small little store, and it had some, you could tell most of it was built out of the kids' personal collections that they were selling. It So there wasn't a lot to kind of look at. And it was before I think the special editions haven't even come out yet. And Shadows of the Empire was the big thing. And it had come out, Shadows of the Empire had come out for Nintendo 64, and the kids were like charging 50 cents for 10 minutes to play Shadows of the Empire. And like, because I couldn't afford a Nintendo, I actually paid the 50 cents so I could play like Dash Rendar on a speeder bike for 10 minutes. So it was kind of like, I don't know, for some reason I always felt like a sucker paying 50 cents to play somebody else's Nintendo. So I always had that in the back of my head, and I never really went back into the store, but now it's like 19 years later, I was down there, and unfortunately that town the economy's not the greatest, so there's not even...
They're not thriving on the 50 cents for 10 minutes of video games economy.
The funny thing is, for a county, Grays Harbor County, that doesn't actually have a bookstore in the entire county, as far as I know, actually one of the biggest attractions is the Suture and Sons Star Wars store, which is kind of it's been covered on Galaxy of Toys, which is a Toy Run, is another podcast where I think that one of the guys is from Seattle, and he was down there and he interviewed the guy Don Suture that owns it, because the sons have moved on. I was talking to the guy and he's like, I kind of jokingly said, "Hey, where's your sons? It's every time I drive by, it's you." And he goes, "My sons, they're not really into Star Wars. They got families and stuff." But anyway, it's an interesting place. And if you have, if you're in the Pacific Northwest and you get the hankering to go out to the beach, it's definitely worth going in and taking a look. I mean, he's got a kind of, let's throw it against the wall and see if it sticks kind of approach to collecting. It's a lot of, it's not organized in any kind of way that I could understand. I mean, he has bins where it's like, oh, all the toys in this bin are $10, and and then he'll have huge displays from Toys R Us hanging on ropes and stuff, along with stuff from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and things. So it's kind of all mishmashed together, and it's pretty interesting. Of course, he's got the obligatory. Now he's starting to kind of put the obligatory Kurt Cobain tribute in the corner, which is
right.
But it's an interesting place, and I wouldn't say like, oh, everybody needs to fly out special. But if you're in the Pacific Northwest, and I told him I'd give him a shout out because he gave me a deal on a loose Darth Vader figure, so I was like, it's kind of a compensated advertising. But I guess my point is that I picked that Darth Vader up because I've been slowly like going into the closet at my mom's house and taking the toys out. And like one week it was the B-Wing, and then the next week, we all know, the people who actually listen to the show every week know the saga of my missing missile from my Y-Wing. But now I got to the point where I brought up my Rebel Troop Transport, and I bought up my AT-AT or AST, AT or whatever they call it. I'm sorry. I consider myself a fan, but I'm not so opinionated that I need to know the proper name of the AT-AT. But
right. I think AT-AT's fine.
Yeah. Well, have you seen that there's like some people arguing
Yes,
about
I have.
I'm just like,
AT-AT's fine.
Really, guys? Really? But anyway,
again, there's not much else to talk about right now, so.
Exactly. It's true. So I ended up getting that, and it's like my snow speeder and all this stuff. So now my poor suffering wife has to, when she goes down the basement, she's like, she's probably thinking that stuff is slowly multiplying. It's like, I used to have like a level. It's like, oh, if it's not in really good shape, I'm not bringing it. Well, now I've got my land speeder that has the broken off top of it, and my my slave one that's missing like half the pieces. So it's kind of like I've gone down the rabbit hole of buying pieces of Star Wars toys, of toys that have gotten lost. Like I bought this goofy thing. It's called a Cap 2, and it was the Mini Rigs line that came out in the 80s. It was like this way of getting inexpensive toys, the things that didn't appear in the movie. So this Cap 2, and people can look it up. It's like, it looks like a little like pod, and it can fit one figure, and in the back you can hook somebody in it. So on the box, it's like Bosk is on it, and he's got like a rebel commando. And anyway, it has suction cups for legs and all this stuff. And unfortunately, in the interim, in the 30 plus years, I lost one of the legs, and so I actually had to go online and buy a leg for my Cap 2. So it's all, I think that's where that's about how deep I'm going to go into collecting right now.
Yeah.
Wow, I don't know why I'm boring you guys with this story.
No, it's fine. But to your point about the initial point that we're kind of in the trough of Star Wars output for the year. I mean, starting next month, we're going to have a new novel every month, or a new book, I should say, at least through like February.
Yeah, the Ahsoka book's coming out really soon, right?
The Ahsoka book comes out in like a month from now. I think it's like October 11th, or early to mid October. And then in November, the Catalyst, a Rogue One novel, which we'll talk about in just a minute, that comes out in November. December, you'll have, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of Rogue One related books coming out, including The Art of Rogue One and whatever kind of books for kids about that movie. January, you'll have the actual Rogue One novelization come out.
Oh, so they're doing that again. They're not doing it day and date.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. The novelization is going to be coming out early January. So I'm sure the movie will still be in theaters when it comes out, but they're not doing the same release date. Although what is Rogue One's release date? Do you remember?
Yes, I do remember now.
We're like 90. It's like 99 days from now.
Yeah, we just passed 100. It's actually, I know this because I made a very goofy mistake. It's December 16th.
Okay,
which is
so
Friday.
the Art of Rogue One book is actually coming out the day the movie comes out. Is what they're doing, at least according to Amazon. The Art of Rogue One: A Star Wars Stories will be released December 16th.
Right.
So that they're
only
doing
on ebook, and then the physical books don't come out till January.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it's ebook.
Oh.
Ebook is December 16th.
Okay.
Hardcover version is January 3rd, and that's Alexander Freed who wrote the Battlefront book, right?
Oh no, that's the novelization. I'm talking about the Art of.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. So the Art of Rogue One, and then I guess the novelization. Alexander Freed wrote the Battlefront book, which we talked about that a little bit. I like it. I think that book's fine. It for the way the story is structured, where it's and the fact that it's based on the Battlefront game, where it's kind of like you're slogging through these different missions and going from mission to mission. The book I think was effective in conveying that sense. And for people who really like military science fiction, that's probably more in that camp. So I thought it was fine, but. I think I'd be interested. I'm interested to see how he handles the novelization. I think it could be good, with Freed writing it. So I'm sure I'll pick that one up as well. So we have we're getting to the point where we're gonna have there's gonna be like new Star Wars stuff all the time. We're just not quite there yet.
Right, we're in this kind of, like you said, in the trough. But it's funny how we were talking about the release date. I guess I don't know why I hadn't even thought about it, and I ended up buying tickets to something that night, the Friday night, like a live event, and I'm just like, when I saw they announced this thing, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get tickets to this. This will be fun, and then I'm like, God, that date sounds familiar. Oh well, and I looked at my calendar or whatever on my phone. It's like, no, I got nothing going on there. Then about 4 hours later, I was looking at something and I'm like, oh my God, that's the same day Star Wars comes out. So, I mean, there's going to be millions of screenings, but it's just that funny thing where it's like, oh geez, did I really just forget when this is coming out?
Mm-hmm.
If I can luck out like I did last year and I get to see it a day early because of it playing at this little independent theater in West Seattle here, I'm kind of hoping maybe I can, get to see it on maybe the 15th or something. I know they've kind of, when they say things come out now, it's like, oh, it comes out the 16th, but then really if you find out it's actually showing like the night before at like 9:00 or something like that. If it's been released in the East Coast, then it's fine to release it on the West Coast. So maybe I'll be able to go that Thursday night and it won't even matter. But that's a lot of stuff for me to do in a weekend.
Yeah.
But what's your feeling about this Catalyst book? That's the...
Yeah, that's the one they I don't know if it was either leaked, or I couldn't tell if it was leaked or if like, oh yeah, the book's coming out soon, so here's the synopsis for the book that provides some backstory to the movie, and now people are acting like, oh, it's a spoiler about these characters.
I mean, it kind of is a spoiler, but...
Yeah, it might be. It could be, for all we know, that's like the first 2 minutes of the movie is them just talking all about what happens in his book, in which case it's like, well, yeah, like it would have been nice maybe to see the movie to find this out, but it's not like they're trying to keep it a big secret. And clearly, I think if they really meant for it to be a big secret and be a big reveal, they probably wouldn't have made that the focus of this backstory book.
Yeah.
That would be that's a guess, but I think based on how the story group is setting things up and their understanding of the cycle of interest, the fan cycle of consumption of Star Wars media. I think, if this was really a huge part of it, like they would have found a way to keep this under wraps, right? They would have maybe put it in the novelization, which was coming later, or they would have found some other way to say like, oh, let's keep that under wraps for now until the movie comes out. So yeah, for those, I guess, who don't know and want to know. So for those who don't know and don't want to know, cover your ears for a few minutes or mute us or skip ahead or whatever. But for those who don't know but want to know, basically the thing that everyone pretty much figured was true is true, which is that Galen Erso, played by Mads Mikkelsen, who's Jyn Erso's father,
which we knew.
Is this right? We knew that much, and then he's the scientist who basically helped build the Death Star, or he kind of invented the technology that enables the Death Star laser to function. And Orson Krennic, the director of the Death Star project, I guess, that's his sort of title or function within the Imperial bureaucracy. He is very close to Galen Erso, and so Jyn Erso has these semi-familial ties with Orson Krennic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's fine. I'm still going to read it. It's still... maybe it would have been nice to have that be a surprise, but it was sort of been rumored. I don't know that a lot of people should be all that surprised. And really, it all comes down to how it's executed in the book and in the movie, I think. And it could be something where like it's trivial and it's not that important. It could be hugely important, but it's treated poorly and it ends up being really boring or, over emphasized. It all, I get it. It all comes down to how it's executed, I think.
Yeah. Spoiler stuff gets a little... I think people get a little too concerned about what is spoilery. If you really want to be nitpicky, the opening crawl to episode 4 is a spoiler for Rogue One. If it's like, the rebels have just had their first major victory or whatever, it's like, oh, we know they're going to win. So it's kind of like, all right. Guys. It's like, and honestly, I was kind of curious as to, I had my own theory because I had a feeling like, this is going to be like, she's going to be kind of I thought, because the way they kind of had her, Jyn Erso portrayed in the first kind of teaser or whatever, I'd kind of gotten this impression that she was like somebody, it's like, maybe she was like, it was like the idea of, what's that, it's kind of like some intergalactic version of Giant or something like that, or maybe not Giant. I was thinking of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof or something, like the father wants the child to be like something else, and he just never could add up to what the, that kind of, which obviously it's not that kind of scenario. It's more of a situation, which, I mean, I guess we're all right saying what some of the synopsis, just that Krennic, has some kind of leverage over Erso because of something with that happened during the Clone Wars, which is really interesting because, and somebody else brought this up on another show, that how, Disney had been, I think the edict from on high was like, don't mention the prequels, don't make people think about the prequels. And really, it's like they're kind of between, having Forrest Whitaker's character be oh gosh, I'm blanked on his name.
Saw
Gerrera from the Clone Wars, and then have, the mention of the Trade Federation, I think, in the synopsis of this Catalyst book. It's like, no, I think they're slowly kind of just going like, hey, now that we've established that The Force Awakens was a hit and people are still love Star Wars, and that the prequels didn't, quote, damage the brand, they can slowly kind of, bring that stuff in as a kind of, and, we've had rumors that this prequel stuff may come to bear again in even the continuing saga movies. I mean, there've been rumors of Hayden Christensen showing up in England and training, but I don't know. I Google that occasionally and try to see if there's any like maybe slips or tweets, and mostly it's always the same story about how he quit acting or something. So I don't know if there's much fire with that smoke.
Yeah, I mean you mentioned the prequels, and now I don't know how much controversy there really is, but or whether this is just some fans going like, hey, what happened with that? But now with the prequels, of course, they set it up that the Geonosians were sort of behind the Death Star, and now it's like, well, Galen Erso is behind the Death Star. What happened to the Geonosians? I mean, I'm sure there's a way that the story group can reconcile those two things and say, well, the Geonosians just designed the superstructure, and Galen Erso was the scientist who invented the laser, and to figure out a way to merge those two things. But at the same time, it is. In fact, I was at a conference last week, and I ran into a friend of mine who I've known forever, who is big into Star Wars, and she, we were chatting, and she was like, so are they like wiping away all of the books and things? And I was like, well, they haven't directly contradicted a lot of it yet. Some of the stuff, the big thing, some of the big things they have, obviously, with like, with Kylo Ren, but a lot of it they just haven't referenced, or they haven't directly contradicted it yet. And so I think with this Galen Erso versus the Geonosians thing, I think it's a case where they're not directly contradicting it. Like there's still some wiggle room. There's still some daylight for them to say, well, both the Geonosians and Galen Erso were involved. The Emperor basically hired the Geonosians and then stole their idea and got Galen Erso to help build the laser. But yeah, it is eventually they're going to start running into more and more of that stuff, in part because Lucas just basically wanted to throw the kitchen sink into Revenge of the Sith and like try to connect the dots on so many different things that even if it was just like a cutaway scene or a character standing in the background, at a certain point they're going to run into like, oh, but in Revenge of the Sith, this character, Tarkin was there and not Orson Krennic, so where does Orson, just that kind of thing, which we've talked about a bunch on the show, but it is interesting because they have to navigate this. They have to kind of stay true in a sense to Lucas's vision, but part of that vision was like, oh, everything is connected. And, R2-D2 was Padme's droid, and then he was Anakin's droid, and then he got passed to Leia, and then to Luke, right? And so the droids were there the whole time, with now this kind of new storytelling era where I don't think they necessarily feel like everything has to be connected. You know, and in fact, you know, they've explicitly said in some cases, like, look, not everything has to be connected, right? Snoke doesn't have to be this person's relative. Rey doesn't have to be this person's relative. Not everything has to connect. But at the same time, like, that's kind of what Lucas... That's sort of what Lucas put out there in a world. That's what he set in motion. So it's understandable why now fans might say, like, well, but, you know, why isn't it this? Or I might have expected this thing to happen. Or that, you know, what happened to the Geonosians? I don't think it's worth getting upset about, but I can understand some confusion about it, I guess, is where I'm landing on that.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's always a certain amount of when you're this invested in a franchise, it's like when people kind of lay out the rules about it and you're like, okay, I understand that. Now I'll view everything through the rules. And I think when Disney takes over and they kind of change course, I think there's a certain type of fan who, you know, has my utmost respect because they kind of do like to have, like, I want a unified theory about Star Wars. It's like when I dip into my fandom, I want to know because that's kind of why people get into these things, is because the world is uncertain. And sometimes it's like, hey, if I can get into Star Wars, it's like I kind of know the rules. Whereas sometimes in life, we don't really know the rules. And so I can kind of understand when people are like, no, we're changing this. They can kind of push back a little bit and be like, hey, I thought I understood exactly that it was this thing. But yeah, I think that in the long run, it is smart for Disney to kind of like, they don't go out explicitly and go, no, that's all wrong. That's all wrong. I mean, the truth is you could make an argument that, like, okay, they introduced the concept of the Death Star in Attack of the Clones, which yet, you know, even more so in some little aspects, especially near the end of the movie, there was that kind of weird kitchen sink approach where Lucas was just trying to, like, I don't know if the movie was a mess from the beginning or whatever. He was throwing in these little tidbits of, like...
I think he probably knew that this would be his last shot at it, at least for a long time. And so it's like, well, if this is the last hurrah, I want to make sure that I put all these things in it that I want to see.
Right. But I guess I bet you anything, they'll probably, as time goes on, and when Catalyst comes out, they'll probably find out that, like, the Death Star that you're seeing in Rogue One is not the Death Star that you saw at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and that
there is another.
Yeah, they made it. You know, they made a version of it, and it blew. You know, the Geonosians either didn't know their science, or something happened, or it was their first test thing, and it blew itself up. So they built another one, and this is the one that they stole the plans. I mean, that's the kind of thing. It's like he steals. The Geonosians have the plans in their database at the end of that battle. They give it to Dooku, and then Dooku goes, oh, I better take these back to my master. And then all the Geonosians basically get slaughtered by clones. So it's like they probably took the plans, and then they started working on them themselves. I mean, that's the least. If I was telling this story, I would sidestep it by saying in the book that yes, that the Death Star that you see at the end of Sith is not the one that you see in Episode 4. It's they've gone through test phases and stuff. I mean, did you ever read the Death Star book?
No,
me neither.
I didn't. I thought about it, and then I looked at the synopsis, and I thought, oh, that's not really as interesting as I would have liked.
Right, because there's been so many different, histories of the Death Star. There was the one that was first introduced in the Jedi Academy trilogy by Kevin J. Anderson, which there was a woman who became a love interest for Wedge at some point. She was actually being, it was like something like Imperial research outside the realm of the Maw,
right.
Which is this,
and the Qui Shush,
yes,
or however you pronounce that name.
Yeah, I don't remember what her name was, but it was like this thing where
it was like QUIXUX or QWIXUX or something like that.
Yeah, I forget, but it's like she'd been kind of. It was like that whole idea of like the idea almost like a Rapunzel or whatever. She's up in this castle, and then Wedge, saves her, and then she'd like. And well, the funny thing is now that I think about it, one of the things that Mads Mikkelsen had kind of slipped out about his take on Galen Erso is that he was an Oppenheimer kind of character, that he created something so beautiful, but it changes the whole, it's also destructive. And honestly, I think that's a lot of people have kind of said that that's the way that, Oppenheimer was, is that he wasn't like a big picture guy. He just worked his work, and then later on it realized to him like just what the implications of his work really was. And that's where he's, his famous quote about from the Bhagavad Gita or whatever. I don't pronounce it right, but the funny thing is that the character from the Cooks or whatever, she kind of had the same thing where she was like, I thought this was all theoretical. I didn't know we were really doing it.
Right. Oh, I just like solving number problems, basically.
Right.
That's how it.
And the funny thing is that it kind of this whole disclosure that Orson Krennic, and for some reason the more I hear Orson Krennic, I just love that name because it kind of fits in this weird kind of thing in my brain about the 70s. Like the name Orson, like nobody names their kid Orson anymore. So like when I was growing up, it was like there was 3 Orsons. There was Orson Welles, who was at the point of his life, his entire career was, Paul Masson ads and doing those creepy documentaries about, Hal Lindsey's The Late Great Planet Earth, which I don't know if you've ever seen those. That was a big thing in the 70s. There was all these documentaries about Nostradamus, about how like he'd predicted that World War II and the murder of Kennedy, and that we were coming for the apocalypse was literally like going to be in 10 years. That was the kind of stuff that. So there was Orson Welles, Orson Bean, who was I think was the voice of Bilbo Baggins in the animated Hobbit, and of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Orson from Mork and Mindy, which was the disembodied voice.
Oh, calling Orson,
and which I think was an Orson Welles joke, because there was always the idea that Mork was always referring to how large this guy was, and then at the end he'd go Mork calling Orson, and he would go into this days or whatever,
like fat jokes.
Yeah, and it was fat jokes, and like him basically at the end of it, like, the equivalent of whatever Kyle or whoever from South Park, when he always does the moral of the story at the end of the episode. It's that kind of idea. Like, I
learned that humans have feelings.
They have a great capacity,
and these feelings are beautiful.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm going off in a side thing.
No, it's fine.
It's just something very 70s about the name Orson. I just don't really, I don't really think that's like somebody would look at their baby in 2016 and go, "Yeah, I'm naming that kid Orson."
Yeah. I kind of like the name. I think it's fine. When I first saw it, I was like, it sounds very generic to me, it's. You stack that up against Tarkin and Krennic and Tarkin and whatever, and Orson, I guess, is better than Williff.
Oh yeah, I forgot he's got that dumb name, Williff Tarkin. Williff. I mean, they do. I mean, maybe I will. Maybe you won't agree. Like I'm a fan of the at least the last names, not so much of these first names that they come up with. I mean, I've just contradicted myself, but anyway.
Yeah, but I it's growing on me.
Sheev Palpatine. Sheev. I mean, I almost kind of wish they had never given him a first name.
Yeah,
because it's like is anybody going to be like, Sheev, come here? It's like they're going to call him, my master and your emperor, his majesty, or whatever. It's like it's never going to get used. It's like there's not going to be like a post Revenge of the Sith book where like the Emperor's like, I've always hated my first name, but it's my I'm stuck with it. Sucks to be me, but whatever. I mean, I thought it was a funny disclosure when it came out that Palpatine had a name. And didn't they write Darth Plagueis the entire book and never once gave, now that's Legends, but they never once gave the guy a first name.
I think he just had one name, but that might be his race, because I can't remember what race he is, but
he's from Naboo, isn't he?
Oh, you mean Palpatine?
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were talking about Darth Plagueis.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, he's
his real name.
He's like the Sam. Is he the same race as that Sand Hill guy from the Trade Federation, or is he a Duros? Is he like one of the?
No, he's a Duro.
Okay, Duro.
He's a Duro. So he's like Lulo from the Poe Dameron comic, which we also talk about later. I thought you were talking about that guy. I don't know that he has a first name.
No, but I don't think Palpatine. I think they just call him Palpatine in the book. But and my point is they never gave him his first name, and people still say that Darth Plagueis is one of the better expanded universe books.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't. Obviously, their movies are a whole different thing, and that if they want to, they're probably not going to call this guy Orson in the movie even, or maybe that's the whole point with Galen Erso. So he'll be the one that calls him Orson. He's the only one that calls him Orson or something like that.
Could be.
I guess my point is that the way that they kind of put out Krennic when what's his name? When he was at Celebration, when he kind of came out in his thing and he wouldn't talk about himself. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting because he's trying to, the movie's trying to promote him as a big baddie.
Mm-hmm.
And the book almost portrays him as a means to an end kind of a guy. It's like that thing where it's like, well, I did want to help these people, and then now that I've helped you, I'm going to manipulate you into doing my stuff because I just want to get ahead in life. It's kind of like this weird thing. It's like, are they going to do these shades of gray kind of? Will there be like a shades of gray kind of evil in Rogue One that we're not used to in Star Wars? The closest thing to that I don't think there's any part of, when you watch The Force Awakens that you go, well, maybe, General Hux is misunderstood, or maybe even Kylo Ren is just misunderstood. It's like, no, they're pretty much jerks. But maybe this idea in Rogue One will be like more of an idea that like, well, Galen Erso, he works for the Empire, but he did it because he saved his family, and, maybe Jyn is, she's a pain in the butt to the rebels, but she's, useful to them. It's like that shades of gray. And even with the characters that are going to be from Jeddah, I think, which would be Baze Malbus and Chirrut. Imwe. That maybe those guys are kind of, at least Baze, he had, in his kind of disclosure, I was like, oh, I was I'm kind of a this, and I'm kind of a that. It's like even he couldn't have a good reading on who he is. And then there's some talk is Bodhi Rook, is he work for the rebels or does he work for the Empire? Because he wears the thing. And even the robot used to be Empire, but then they reprogrammed. So it's this idea that like it's going to be an interesting movie because it almost will be kind of doing a tightrope walk through what.
It's. At first I thought, when I first saw the trailer and there's that, it's Saw Gerrera Forrest Whitaker saying, "What will you become?" And then it's a shot of Jyn Erso in an Imperial uniform. Like I think I mentioned it, but I was like, I wonder if maybe she starts out as like an Imperial pilot, like a TIE pilot or something, and she's dissatisfied and she's kind of rebellious, but that's what she does, and then she goes over the rebels, and then I was like, no, because they already have Finn, and that's maybe too much like Finn. But now to hear you recap all that, now I wonder if no, they're not going to do that with her, because they're already doing that with so many other characters, right? With K2SO and Bodhi Rook, right? Like, yeah, they sort of worked for the Empire, they weren't happy about it, and then they left. It's like, well, we can't have every character be like that. And so it's now that they've introduced, and it wasn't a new idea, but now that they've introduced Finn as this kind of like major character who used to be a stormtrooper and then left the First Order. Now it seems like they're filling in a lot of these like other minor, they're making it more common than it was in the EU. It seems like.
Yeah, I mean, there was always...
And maybe not. Maybe it's about...
I was thinking Kyle Katarn had been, from the Dark Forces games, who was, quote, he was the original guy that stole the plans. He had been a stormtrooper or something like that. And, of course, there's... The EU has always made this comment that, like, in the old story of Han Solo, that he had actually washed out of Imperial Academy, that kind of thing. So it is kind of thing where it's not... They didn't just kind of create this in the last 2 years or something. But yeah, it's kind of like, but that was never part of the main thrust of the movies, of the kind of stuff that most lay people. I wonder, like, and get the last thing I'll say on this is that I wonder if in episode 8, if this whole idea that Finn had been in the First Order, is this going to come up again? I mean, I'd already talked about the fact that there was never any kind of concept of the idea of like, well, should we trust this Finn guy because he was just a First Order guy like 10 minutes ago? But I also think that's a thing that Star Wars doesn't do. It kind of doesn't question people's motivations at least in the movies. I mean, it's like Princess Leia going,
"Oh, I can see it in your eyes that you are a good person."
Right.
And so distrust you.
And that's almost like if you really watch the interaction between Boyega and oh geez, I'm really bad with names today.
Poe Dameron
with Poe Dameron and Finn, it's like you can kind of see when in the eyes, it's like, yeah, there is some kind of evaluating going on, but it's never brought up again. It's this kind of thing like, you're in with us, all right, cool, and you're all rights and purposes.
We don't have the time to question. Like, we just need to go now, and so if you're with us, great, and if not, we'll deal.
And I think that's consistent generally. There was only one real betrayal in Star Wars, and which was obviously Lando, but really that was kind of, you could make an argument. It's like, what else would he do? It's like, he's the, Han's the guy who brought trouble to his town. Really, what do you expect to him to, like, oh, I haven't seen that guy in 20 years. Yeah, sure, I'll just give up this, incredibly lucrative thing that I've been building, or I won in a card game or whatever. I mean, people always say Lando won Cloud City in a card game only because Han says it. It's like, he might have actually applied. I'm sorry. He went through an extensive interview process, and he's like sitting there with Lobot going over his resume. And,
but he's embarrassed. He doesn't want to tell his friends that he went straight. So he's like, how do you get? He's like, what it in a card game?
Yeah, you know me. I won it in a card game.
I certainly didn't spend hours working on my resume.
Yeah, I didn't go back to school after I got out of.
I don't
playing cards.
Have a degree in mining management. Absolutely not. Exactly. Card game. That's how I got this job. Don't believe what all of my employees tell you.
Exactly. We're not going to be doing we're not going to do another version of Empire in a few years. It comes out and like they say Calrissian, and he goes, it's Dr. Calrissian. I have a doctorate in Cloud City administration and Tabana gas mining. Silly.
Yeah. So, other news, Amy Hennig is still working on that video game. It's still pretty far away, but she keeps being asked about it, even though it's pretty far out from development.
Yes.
Or maybe it isn't. I mean, the only reason we have to think that it's still pretty far out is because she keeps saying, like, well, we're still at very early stages. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's just saying that. But she talked about it recently, and you were there.
Yeah, I last weekend was PAX. Well, it used to be called PAX Prime, which is the Penny Arcade Expo, but now, because I think there are 4 of them, they've decided to now it's just called PAX West, and it's a huge industry independent video game convention that's been happening in the Pacific Northwest since 2003, I think, and it's every year. It's huger than the last time. And getting tickets, it's like if you basically have like this weird window in sometime in April that comes out, they'll announce it on Twitter, and then everybody buys every pass there is, and then you have to go on like one of these ticket resellers, and that's what I did. I had to go, even though the show was completely sold out. I was able to purchase at a steep rate. It was about $20 more than it should have been, but I had a 1-day pass, and that was the big thing. I was like, oh great, Amy Hennig's gonna go talk at the Benaroya Hall. It's about video games, and it was an interesting conversation. There was, like I said, there wasn't a lot of info about Star Wars. I'm kind of unfortunately I was kind of in a dark corner, so I couldn't really take notes, but I'm kind of paraphrasing from this article from GameReactor.eu called Amy Hennig Discusses Visceral Star Wars at PAX West by Fabrizia Malgieri, and I'm just kind of going off of her article to get some quotes. And basically she said something like, oh, here's a one quote. It's like, when I started working on this project, and again, I have to parse myself carefully. I haven't had anything to drink yet today, which is good because it's not even noon. It was like 10 a.m. So I'm not going to accidentally say anything, I don't think. But the task was to do the same thing. Do the same thing that Lucasfilm has been doing, and to do it with them. It was kind of like that was almost as much info as she gets. She talks about the idea of the one pull quote that I actually kind of glommed on is like, what is the question? What is authentic Star Wars, and how do we make more of it? And I mean, honestly, I think at the end of the day, that's for these video games that, we don't know anything about. That's really the question that, you want to hear the people making it asking. And it's kind of like, I mean, she, like I said, she didn't show anything more. She didn't show anything. There wasn't any more clip. I mean, there was that clip that has been all over the net and stuff, like you can see of the guy exiting the door and the Star Destroyer in the air. But I guess that my takeaway from this is I feel that we're in pretty good hands with this game, and that it might actually turn out to be something kind of special, because just listening to her talk about her how she approaches story, and the fact it's not, story isn't just this and then this happens and then this happens. It has to have a cohesive feel. And I don't understand the logic of video games, because there is a lot of, it's very different than, say, a movie or a story, because there's obviously a lot of choice. But some games are more guided than others. So it's usually the details that you get to be a part of rather than the end of it. Because it seems like no matter how many times that people will say, oh, everything you do in a game affects the ending. But I've never seen a game like that, where most of the time at the end of things, like you have a choice between 3 things, But
right.
I think that we're kind of, like I said, my takeaway from it is that she's she takes this very seriously, and she is she's been doing this for 25 years or whatever. And I mean, she to the point where she'd kind of even admitted at the end, there was a Q&A, and she'd kind of admitted, hey, Amy, how do you balance, having these important properties and working with a life? And she admitted, flat up, I don't. There's a lot of things that normal people do that I haven't paid attention to. And she was like, she's straightforward. She's like, I'm 52 years old, so I've been working on these games for a long time. And I get the feeling that this Star Wars game isn't going to be her coasting. I think she's fully involved, and to the point where it's where I feel like I would think she's pretty confident, because otherwise, maybe if they weren't confident, they'd actually be more apt to start letting a little bit more slip out to kind of get a feel for how people react to what they have in mind. I mean, Lucas, they're not, it's not LucasArts. I'm sorry. They've been gone forever. But, Visceral, which is the company she's working for on this, I think they've got this well in hand. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I read a little bit about it, and it sounded like she had some interesting ideas for the game, or either they're her ideas or they came from the Lucas Story Group or whomever. I'm sure they developed them together, but just talking about the difference between what they're working on now and the Uncharted games, which, from what I gather, it's essentially an Indiana Jones game in all but name.
Yeah, and she talks a little bit about that.
Yeah. But just the idea that in those types of games, you're just playing as one character, and it's just kind of their point of view. You see what they see, what they know, all that kind of stuff. But in a Star Wars game, you have the Empire or the First Order, depending on what time period this takes place. I'll just say Empire for sake of argument. You have the Empire and those characters. People want to see what they're doing, and they're integral to the story. So you kind of need to see what they're doing, but at the same time, the character can't know what they're doing. And then I think in the past she's talked about getting more of like an ensemble feel, similar to the movies. Rather than just have like you have Indiana Jones and then everyone else. And so, putting those pieces together, it sounds like it could be an interesting approach. I don't play enough other video games to know like whether these are issues that other people have already figured out and solved already, or whether these are actually like kind of new things to consider within video game storytelling, in that world,
right?
But it seems like it's something new for her, which I gather means that not a lot of other people have had to deal with this either.
Yeah, I mean, she said something, and I'm paraphrasing, is that basically there are no sidekicks in Star Wars, that every character has a kind of a purpose. And
Chewie's kind of
I mean,
he's not,
but he's not viewed as but I mean, I guess maybe that, and I'm putting words in her mouth, is that the idea that's just how people don't view him as a sidekick. They view him as a full partner in this. Now, of course, the idea that they don't get the same kind of screen time and the
that's what I was
the resolution's not the same. But I think that's and it almost makes me wonder if that's kind of one of the things about we might luck out, is that she will have the game will be the idea that you won't be just going, hey, here's this guy with a funny Star Wars name, and you'll be playing through him, and it'll always start like every game starts that like, oh, you crawl out of bed and it's like, oh, I was in a wreck and I have amnesia, so they have an excuse to kind of explain the world to you, which is like a big part of KOTOR, the Knights of the Old Republic game, is that the whole point is like, so first 20 minutes is them dealing with the fact that you have amnesia, and you're like, oh yeah. I mean, she admitted that like there's, in the I forget what it was, what the term she used, but I would say there is a kind of a dissonance between the idea, like somebody come up about the idea of, she was heavily involved in the first 3 Uncharted games, that, it's one of the great things about the Uncharted games, and yes, to deny that Indiana Jones had a big influence on that you'd be a liar. But one of the things it also gained from being influenced by Indiana is it has a really great story. It has characters that you actually care what happened to. It's got great voice acting. I mean, I think all those things are super important. But there's this kind of idea that like this great story, but when you actually play the game, it's like when you're done with the level, you've just murdered like 100 people. And it's like this kind of idea of like, oh, well, how does the story deal with that? And I think she kind of said, well, that's the compromise you make when you're telling these kind of stories. It's like, there's, I think if it was just a situation where it's like, well, it's a video game, but you only kill like 4 people, I think some people would find it kind of dull or something. I mean, not having a lot of action, not that you have to kill people to have action, but I think you look at like, there's another, one of the big games that came out in the last month with this one called No Man's Sky, and it's been a very controversial title because for a year and a half, 2 years, this guy that had kind of been the director of the game had been very, I won't say loose-lipped, but he'd been very emphatic of all these exciting things, like you can do whatever, you have complete control, you can fly up on a space battle and you can take a side, you can travel galaxies, you can do this. Well, unfortunately what happened is when the actual game came out, it's basically a very simple kind of almost pastoral game of resource management. Like, oh, well, your ship doesn't fly unless you collect this, and then you have to go walk around and like shoot rocks and then collect it, and then it fills up a slot on your ship, and then you leave. So a lot of this kind of open, expansive world that people, which I think is really what people want. They want, what do they call it? Procedural situation. I don't know. It's procedural something. Basically, it's like they write an algorithm, so they have all the elements that make up the game world, and then they have an algorithm that at certain points it just picks up the algorithm. So even they don't know what you're going to run into. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, Skyrim, which is a game a lot of people, I think that game uses a kind of a procedural thing where events, some of them wouldn't even be known by the programmers themselves. I don't know. I've never really played Skyrim, but I think people are kind of, they want that in a Star Wars game. They want to have an authentic experience. I don't think they want to be, a lot of times when a game is overly controlled by the rules of the game, they call it, people refer to it being on the rails. Like, I don't want a game that's on the rails, and it's,
where it's sending you towards a particular destination.
It's almost the equivalent of being on like a Disneyland ride. And it's like you're experiencing all this stuff, but aside from kind of stopping or repelling obstacles, it's like there's not a lot of choice in the game. And I think that by and large, just because of the nature of technology, is like most games and most Star Wars games have been very on the rails. Even the RPGs, it's like you're kind of, if you don't go out and do these main objectives, you're just gonna kind of hit a dead end on the game. I don't really know. I mean, she obviously never said anything about like, oh, it's going to be this. And I can almost, appreciate that she didn't want to go out there. Cause like I said, this No Man's Sky, this guy basically got himself caught in a trap of, every time someone would ask, can you do this? He'd say, yep. Until it got to be the game was coming out in a month. And then he would start to go, nope. And then they're like, what? And then the game come out and they find out like, oh, the scope of this is much smaller than we thought. So I'm hoping that maybe it'll be the opposite. And when it finally comes out, this game will be much larger than even the hints have been. But I have
that's my sense too. I mean, especially they're gonna want to. I mean, at a certain point, they're going to have to decide, they meaning Lucas Story Group, I guess, and the people they partner with, they're going to have to decide, do we want to just make kind of satisfying games that are familiar to people, but put in a Star Wars context, like the Battlefront games, essentially, or do we want like Star Wars games to be at the cutting edge of video game storytelling? And it could be that at this point in the process, they're still like, all right, let's just come up with Star Wars ideas, and then, yeah, great, Battlefield, but in Star Wars, let's go for it. Right. Uncharted, but in Star Wars, let's go for it. But I think at a certain point, they are going to have to. They're going to have to be wary of doing that too often. In which case, the broader video game community, the fans will say like, oh, this is just like X, but in Star Wars. And that'll be fine for Star Wars fans. And certainly there are enough Star Wars fans who play video games that they will do okay for a while. But I do wonder if eventually they'll get to a point where, we need to start pushing this forward. And I don't even just mean technologically with the virtual reality stuff, but, kind of like what you're saying with the storytelling, with, the possibilities open to players to kind of go explore on their own and have some control over what the parameters of the game they experience are. But that I also wonder, since they don't really have a centralized video games division. I mean, I'm sure they have like a division of Lucasfilm for the video games, but they're partnering with other existing development companies rather than starting up their own. Rather than reinitiating LucasArts, they're saying, okay, well, we're going to partner with, this company to make a game, and we're going to partner with that company to make a different game, and we're going to partner with this other company to make something else. And so, yeah, I wonder if that makes it easier or harder for them eventually to say, you know what, we want to push things, and we want Star Wars games to become known for their sort of innovative approach. Yeah. Or whether they're comfortable saying, you know what, we just want to make satisfying games that don't have a very high barrier to entry, but they're appealing to Star Wars fans.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting way of looking at it, because it is that kind of thing where it's like a lot of people have, you can find, like, when G4 was still a thing, they always had these little mini documentaries about the history of LucasArts. And one of the things that people used to say about LucasArts is they had some really great games, and then they had some really awful games. And they would, like, almost to seem to follow success with failure almost on a cycle. And that was kind of, I think that's what Lucasfilm kind of took away from that, and the idea that, like, we don't want to own our game. We don't want a game studio, because, I mean, also a AAA title, which is, your Battlefront and stuff like that. Basically, that's the $60 game type stuff that they do television ads for. That's a AAA game. Like, they're actually a bigger financial burden than even sometimes movies. I mean, I don't know what the operating budget for Battlefront is, but I think they actually they have to sell this for $60. It's like it only costs $10 to go to the movies generally, and they have to sell a lot more games to kind of make their money back and to be viable. So when Lucasfilms was a thing, it's like if they released like a mobile game that didn't do well and a console game that didn't do well, that could completely clean out their coffers. And because it puts the responsibility in-house to do these games. And I think maybe the test is that, they're like, well, what we're going to do is we're going to take, our brand and go reach out to the industry leaders. But the truth is that a lot of these people aren't not necessarily leaders in pushing forward the technology. They're more like leaders in getting people, to buy games, people to want to play games, and it almost makes you, it's that the dichotomy. It's like, well, if these groups are like, say, an EA or a Visceral or whatever, it's like, do they want for their first game out of the thing? Do they want to make something so different that it might be actually challenging for people to actually get into? It might take a lot of work. But at the end of the day, it'd be a very satisfying experience. Or do they want to go for something where it's like, well, we can market this to, we can market this game to 12-year-olds or 42-year-olds, and it's just like you just jump in and it's Star Wars. So it's that kind of idea. Like, yeah, it's like, personally, I wish they were pushing the technology. I hope they're pushing the technology forward. Maybe because I feel like we're at this area with video games where, like, the old school kind of boring, like, let's go into a room with a gun and we'll shoot people and stuff like that, mixed with the idea of like world building, mixed with the idea of telling a different kind of story. It's like where all those things are valid, but it's like, I think it would behoove them to at least have something that was more complex, something that people could almost, dare I say, be more artistic. It's a thing where people can, when you get done playing it and you go, I think I just interacted with a piece of art. Okay, it's not like, it's not a Monet, but there was heart and soul in this. And I feel like there's a lot of room for people to present that, because people are taking stuff that I personally wouldn't consider art and call it art, not because they're wrong, but because that there's part of them that really want their games to be art. And so they're kind of primed for telling a deeper story or having a bit more complexity to their games.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that that probably is a tricky balance because, it is a Star Wars game. They're going to have any Star Wars video game, even no matter what the rating is, and I don't even know if video game ratings matter anymore, but
they do.
It's going to have interest from kind of younger players, younger kids who are kind of into video games, or they like Star Wars and they have a PlayStation or whatever. So I don't think they can make it like too complex because, or otherwise they risk losing that kind of demographic. But at the same time, and two, I think wasn't part of your experience with Battlefront that like after a while it was like, wow, these are just I'm on this server with people who play this game all the time, and it's not the best experience. And so they have to avoid that. But then at the same time, they can't make it too simple because then it'll seem like they're kind of stuck in the past. And I don't think the people working on the game would be interested in doing something that was too simple.
Right. And I think that's, I mean, I come and go with Battlefront at the idea that mainly because I play a more complex version of that game anyway, that's not connected to Star Wars, is made by the same company, where it's this idea you have a loadout and you have to attack a place and there's vehicles and it's very chaotic and it's, I'm not going to say realistic, but it's definitely, it's an experience of but in this Star Wars thing is very arcade-ish. And I think, some people love it. I mean, like you said, I don't play it constantly. I'll go a couple weeks without playing it and I'll dip it back in. And it can be frustrating for a person like me that's not who likes video games, but I'm not particularly good at video games. It's when you're competing against people, it's like walk out the door, you get shot. Walk out the door, you get shot. And it's like a one-hit kill. And it's like, I want to play as Lando. And then you get to play as Lando for, 3 minutes, and then it's like, oh, I actually caught myself because the Cloud City map is so nice that I catch myself just like walking around, and it's
That's neat.
You could go around and, occasionally somebody will sneak up behind you and shoot you, and that kind of sucks. But if you got the jump pack, you can jump up. Like one time I spent half the game just walking around the model of Slave One, trying to see if I could find some kind of hidden button to make it open, because I actually found for some reason, I'd been playing the game for weeks and didn't realize you could walk up and open the elevator doors. They didn't go anywhere, but you could go and close yourself in a room, and people
hide, I guess.
Yeah, like other people that weren't even your opponents in the game. This guy was losing his shit. Like, he was so mad. I could see the outline of him because that's the way your friend and foes are become lighted outlines. He was just like shooting at this door because he was so mad that I had gone into this room. And I'm like, he obviously can't figure out. All you needed to go was over and push the button and I would be right there. It was like, didn't anybody know you could do this? I mean, I don't think I'm sure that people that really know the game have found that months and months and months ago. But on the other hand, I was quite pleased with myself. And I was like walking around going, oh, if you go out, this must be the freezing chamber where Luke and Vader fought. And I'm like, oh, wow. It's just seeing it in 3 dimensions was much more interesting than actually playing the game. It's like, the only thing that really bummed me out is that you can't go out to that long, gangplank or whatever, where Luke loses his hand, because you can't even see it, but you can go up to the glass where he gets thrown out the window or whatever, so it's kind of like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like
because you're playing against whoever joins up, depending on how the game works. It's sort of like Battlefront. Like, you're playing against college students who don't have class that day, or they just decide they want to spend a whole week playing a video game to like get really good at it, and you're like, I don't have that kind of time, or even I played is it Galaxy of Heroes? What's the game where you like build up a team of characters and then you do battle? Galaxy
of Heroes. I haven't.
Right? So I actually checked that game out recently because I was like, well, it's something to do. It's not I certainly don't have the technology or the time to invest in like Battlefront or even what's it called? Not Underworld.
Oh.
What's that dungeon crawler game?
Oh gosh,
you played
the one where they're like it was supposedly canon and it doesn't.
Right.
It's so locked up.
And then people quickly stopped caring.
Uprising.
Yeah, that's right. Right. I didn't have the time to invest in that, but it's like Galaxy of Heroes. It seems fun. Like I could build a team of like Lando and Lobot and all my favorite characters. And I started playing it, and I mean, you really have to play it a lot to collect all of the things you need to collect in order to just unlock characters you've heard of. Like forget like Lando, I think is even like the top character, and that's like the last character you unlock. But even people you've heard of, like you start out as like a Jedi communicator, some generic Jedi in a robe, some generic sand person, it's like, not even characters with names, just
right.
Jedi, a healer, and right. So you just do that over and over, like Ewok Scout, and right, which is fine, like that's fine and all, but after a while, it's just like, it's just doing battle over and over again to build up the things to purchase, training pods, which then allow you to make your character stronger, which then makes it easier to fight these battles. And then eventually you might get a chance to unlock one piece out of the 15 pieces you need to get an Ewok that you've heard of, right? And you're like, okay, great. Right. So and I hadn't even gotten to the like Imperial table because they're separate. The way it's set up is weird too. They're like separate gaming tables, and there's like a light side and a dark side. So I hadn't even gotten to the point where I was like unlocking Imperial characters yet. It was all Rebel people. And so after a while, I was just like, I don't have the time to keep playing this often enough to where like I finally feel like, great, I get to assemble a team of characters that I care about.
Right.
And that like will make this fun for me. So yeah, I mean, there's. And I'm guessing that people like me, there aren't very many people like me who are actually going to care and be involved and be purchasing these games. And so I'm not. I readily acknowledge that I'm not really their audience for these video games. But at the same time, like there are people who play who game or whatever, but they have jobs, they have kids. It's something that they can do in their spare time, but it's not something that they can devote like a whole week straight to getting good at this game.
Yeah.
And so, they're going to have to, in addition to like kids who are just starting to play video games, like they're going to have to keep those people in mind too. And it's a challenge, and it seems like they've done an okay job so far, I guess. Like we said, Uprising was probably pretty quickly forgotten, or at least kind of overwhelmed by Battlefront. Like Battlefront became their big kind of tentpole game.
Yeah.
But at the same time, people were like, yeah, okay, this is fine. It's not as great as we expected to be, but it's good for now, and they're updating it. But now I think people are kind of ready for more than just Battlefront. So they're going to have to figure that out, and it sounds like they're working on it, but it'll be a little while before it comes to fruition.
Yeah, it almost seems that it's harder for them to make these games than it is to make the movies. It's like, and partly because they know they don't want to invest, all this money and then make some piece of crap that's people are gonna forget about in a week, like they would do in the LucasArts would do in the aughts, where they're like, hey, what was really big? That pod racing game we made for N64 and the Dreamcast. Let's make another pod racing game. And it's like, I haven't revisited that. It was on sale back a couple months ago. I never bought it, but I enjoyed the pod racing game. But yeah, having gone to that PAX thing, it's just where you're around people that like gaming is kind of like the primary thing. It's kind of I don't know if they're as into movies, it's like they're not into his books. They're not really into if they're into music, they're into video game music. It's that kind of thing where,
they collect video game soundtracks and that's all they listen to.
Right.
Yeah, no, I had friends like that in college.
Yeah. It's like, wow. It's one of those things where it's like I quickly found myself like, wow, I am really out of my depth on this. It's like I always like people like I've had, friends always joke, "Oh, Robert's the gamer." And it's like, yeah, right, not compared to anybody that actually plays video games, because if you it's like I have a very, it's like I have like a 2-hour limit a night, and it's like I'm out and I don't think about it when I'm not there. It's like I might actually spend more time listening to gaming podcasts than I do actually playing video games. But but I mean that's partly because I'm trying to be very judicious about how I spend my time. And I guess that's why this kind of stuff is like, I'm very like, I want it to be something that's like, if this Star Wars game, which has no name, comes out, if it's going to be complex, I want it to be something that's going to be worth my time. Because I've bought things like the big game that came out last late fall, which was the same time as Battlefront came out, which I bought, like Fallout 4. And I thought, oh, that's going to be my thing. It's like, this is going to be like, I'll invest, months into this. And it was like, because of little things and the way they'd done it, like I knew within like the first 2 days, I'm like, oh, this is not going to be something that I'm going to come back to, that's going to hook me, that I feel like, oh, I really want to accomplish the things that they want you to accomplish this game because the rewards are good. So I quickly said nope, and it ended up on the shelf, and I sold it really fast. And it's like, that's where I'm at with games right now. If it's like, if you're going to want me to invest, if you're a plug and play kind of thing, that's one thing. But if you really want me to invest time into something, you got to make it good. It can't just be it can't be like, oh, well, read between the lines. Like, no, it has to be, the design has to be good. The characters have to be compelling. And I could count on one hand the amount of games that, the story was like, wow, that was something on the level of a true, of what they always say that video games are, rather than what they say and how it is. And I honestly, off the top of my head, I could think the only one was that game that came out called The Last of Us, which was kind of a weird post-apocalyptic game. But I mean, I don't even know if the gameplay was as great as the story, but it definitely didn't get in the way of telling the story. And that's what I'm really hoping for when this game. Yeah. Should we talk comics?
Well, yeah, so I hope you get your wish, Robert, with regard to video games.
I know, it's my only wish.
But yeah, so several comics have come out over the last several weeks. 2 issues of Poe Dameron, 5 and 6, Star Wars 22, Han Solo 3. Which do you want to talk about first?
Oh, did you read Poe Dameron 6?
I did.
Oh, damn. Well, we'll talk about Poe Dameron, and I'll have to admit that I haven't seen it. I haven't read it.
All right. So Poe Dameron 5, right? Poe Dameron went to Megalox Beta. I almost said Betamax 5. Megalox Beta.
Megalox 12.
Megalox Beta, which you can purchase at your local GNC retailer.
It's good for recovery after a hard workout.
Yeah.
I'm so ripped right now. It sounds like a Brody Stevens thing.
I'm sorry, I know that I added to that.
Yes, do I crush Megalox 7? Yes! Positive energy.
Yeah. So they're on, I don't even remember, Megalox Beta, that's what it's called.
That's it.
Which is a prison planet, because Gracchus the Hutt is there. Gracchus the Hutt has information about Lor Santeca. He's there. Agent Terex from the First Order is also there. And Gracchus has said, whoever breaks him out of prison will get the information. So each of them are making preparations to break Gracchus the Hutt out of prison, except it turns out Agent Terex actually has no intention of doing so. He says it's because, Gracchus broke their deal. Like, Terex got there first. He had a deal with Gracchus. And then Gracchus, when Poe showed up, said, well, I'll include Poe in this, and whoever does it first will get it. And so Terex is mad about that, except you get the sense that he was probably going to double-cross Gracchus the Hutt anyway. And so he's plotting with some other crime lords there on the prison planet, including Papa Torin, who was last seen in the Lando comic. While that's going on, Poe sends some signal to BB-8, and BB-8 and the other astromechs are in the hangar up on the station that's beaming down the gravity field. So the astromech droids from Black Squadron, each of which is a different shape and a different color, they go on their mission. We're not really sure what they're doing yet. They're trying to get to some kind of computer terminal. There's a big bad droid there to try to guard the terminal, and it kills one of the, well, I guess it destroys one of the astromechs, and then the rest of them fight with the big bad droid. And that's kind of where it ends, sort of a cliffhanger, not, but it's to be continued in the next issue. I think it's a little weird that we haven't seen any more BB-8 or any more BB units elsewhere, right? Because in the movie, in The Force Awakens, Poe Dameron says it's a BB unit, right, implying that there are others and that they're all over the place. But then we haven't seen any of those elsewhere. So I assume they made more. But when are we going to see them? And, because that could be interesting. But it could be that they're still, riding this wave of like BB-8 super popular. We don't want to confuse people. And we're just going to ride that wave of popularity. Because I don't remember, in the original trilogy movie era, like meaning the era in which in our world in which the movies were released, not the era in the Star Wars universe in which those events took place. But like when those movies came out, did they show other astromech droids, or was it just R2D2 and C-3PO? I mean, I guess they put other protocol droids in the movies. And they put a couple of. They eventually put a couple of astromech droids in in Return of the Jedi or something. But
they had them. Every trooper, every X-wing or Y-wing person had them, but and there would be junky ones floating around in the Jawa Sandcrawler. That one that kind of has a little crown on its head, and then there's R5D4. And then there's not a lot of R2 units on Hoth.
In terms of like cartoons and comic books and stuff, that like not in the movies, but the other material. Like I don't remember. I guess maybe they didn't want to confuse people, or they just
I don't really remember that.
Focus on R2 and 3PO, but it at a certain point it's like, all right, well, it'd be nice to see another BB unit just so that we know that this isn't like a special droid that was handcrafted and artisanal astromech droid.
Well, that was
But the other thing that kind of bugs me a little bit is the way it's written out in the comic, and so R2D2 is ARTOODETOO, and right, so you have to kind of spell these things out phonetically, and with BB-8, the letter 8 is spelled out as ATE, which I get that's how it registers phonetically, but it always looks so weird to me. Right, it looks like it's the verb 8, right? BB-8. You're like,
right,
BB-8 what?
It's like a Van Halen album name.
Right. And so it's like, it's not like a huge thing, but when I see it, I'm like, that looks weird to me. Sorry, you were going to say something about BB-8.
Oh, I would say that, that the whole idea that he could be artisanal, it's funny, but you almost think like, well, that could explain why Hux even made a big deal about it, Right. It's like, they didn't make or BB-8 units are only available to like really rich people, so maybe I don't really know, because they don't have an origin story for BB-8, do they? Maybe
not yet.
Maybe Princess Leia owned, she probably has money, and maybe she's the one who's like, oh, well, we know it's Princess Leia because it's a BB unit. Because that's like she's the only person who uses them, or people associated with the Resistance would have BB-8 units. So that was almost like, they got away and it was a BB unit. And they're like, it's my mother. My mother, she's the only person that's like, she's the only person I know that has a BB unit.
Yeah.
Wouldn't let me use it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like the phonetic kind of thing. I mean, I like the droid stuff in here actually, because it does kind of remind me of that old school Marvel, like the droid world thing, which would have like, I can't even remember. It must be from like the first 2 years. It was like pre-Empire. They had like a droid, like droids run amok or something. And I mean, that was kind of the exciting thing about Episode 1 when they're escaping from Naboo in that cruiser, and then all of a sudden you see like, oh wow, they've got like 8 of these R2 units, so like they're kind of ubiquitous around here. And then of course they all get shot, and then you're like, oh my god, this is horrifying. But it's like, I mean,
it contributed to that sense of like, oh, anyone can be a hero, right? Like any random astromech droid could turn out to like be intimately involved in, you know, taking down the Death Star eventually. But then it got to the point where it was like, yeah, okay, it doesn't have to always be.
Yeah, he was always great. It's like he was doing great stuff, 30 years previous.
Clearly, it can't just be any astromech droid.
Which is kind of funny because it does kind of undercut the idea of like kind of a more positive idea that, you know, well, I mean, I'm going off in realms here, but the idea that, you know, Star Wars, at least when I was, you know, when Star Wars first came out, it's like the idea, like, yeah, you know, just even some teenage guy who lived in a podunk town could jump into the fray and be an important part. But yeah, as time goes on, it's like Lucas almost undercuts that. It's like, no, he's a chosen one. He's actually, and then at the end you find out, oh, he's actually related to the worst of the worst guy. So it's like, yeah, it's almost like destiny at this point. And then he reiterates that, you know, to the ad nauseum in the prequel. So it's like, it does take out the idea that, you know, people are inherently special, and if given a chance, they can show you how that they can make a positive change. No, it's like, no, it's the old idea of,
it's because Anakin Skywalker built him.
It's divine right. It's the whole, it's that same concept that, you know, humans have been dealing with for like the last, you know, 500 years of this idea of people like, oh no, I'm in control because it's the will of the Force.
Right.
But
I mean, so I kind of like that they're different colors, and in general too, there's some good color work going on in this issue, in the sense of having kind of different color palettes for different locations. So when they're down on Megalox Beta, but outside the prison, it's this kind of yellowish, goldish hue. But then when they're inside the compound, and when Terex is talking to the other crime bosses, is this kind of purplish color. But then when the droids are up on the station and they're in the, you know, those kind of space station hallways, it's that whitish blue. And that carries over a little bit into the next issue too. You know, there's eventually, you know, you get onto Terex's ship, and it's this kind of black and red color scheme. So that I thought that Phil Noto, I guess, he's doing both he's the artist and the colorist, I think, for these, and so that was nice. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say the thing about, and I feel bad saying this, but for some reason I enjoyed the art in Fives a lot more than some of the other ones. I think this is one of the ones I complained about the depth of field, but yeah, the use of coloring and it almost, I actually had to go check to see, like, did they switch artists? Because I actually enjoy the art in this issue a lot more than the first 4.
No, I mean, Phil, I really like his style. I mean, I think too, it probably takes a couple issues. I mean, even though the artists who work on comics, you know, they do a lot of like test pages and sketches, and, you know, they really try to get these characters down. I think it still takes a few actual issues for everything to kind of look good. I mean, that's, you know, with the Lando comic, Phil Noto didn't do the Lando comic, but I mean, if you remember, like, Lando, his face was kind of all over the place in in that first issue or two, and then by the time you got to like 3, 4, and 5, you're like, all right, it's a little more consistent now, and so it could just be that this is still issue 5. He's still kind of working, issues 1, 2, and 3. He's still kind of working out how to get that look and that depth of field and everything else that he wanted. I mean, I will say that Jess is sort of all over the place in issue number 5. Her face looks different in like 3 different panels. Yeah. It looks 3 different, and it's so distracting to me. But I will say, I guess we won't go into issue 6 too much because I don't want to spoil it for you. But I will say that looks a lot better in issue 6. It's basically fixed.
See, I thought that this was a 5-issue series. Is this just a running monthly thing? I guess,
yeah, because issue 6, it sort of puts a cap on it, but then it also looks like there's an issue after that. So I think it's going to be a continuing series until they decide they're done with it.
That's crazy, because it's like that's more than Lando gets. That's more than. Is Han's a limited series? I forget.
I think it is. I think it's just related to this race. I don't know how many issues they have planned for this Poe Dameron story. And it could be sort of like with Darth Vader, where once this storyline is done, then they're gonna discontinue it, and the end to that story could be a lot sooner than 25 issues.
Right.
But yeah, I am, even though I liked the Lando series. I thought Chewbacca was okay. Again, I Phil Noted did the art on that one, and I thought the art basically saved that for me. Leia, we've talked about, was not that great, but I'm still like, okay, so are we going to get a second Leia story with a different group of people working on it? Or are we going to get a second Lando story? Or are we going to get a second, Chewbacca story? How are these really going to be one shot or 5-issue deals, and how many of them are going to okay, in the future, if someone approaches us with an idea for a Lando story, we'll pick that back up, I guess.
Yeah,
I don't know. It remains to be seen.
I guess my point is it kind of confused me, because it's like I tend to like when they go, there's going to be a Poe Dameron, and for some reason, I don't know why, I thought it was a 5-issue series, and that I would say that has colored my review of it, because I'm just like, hey, you only got 5 issues, just get going, even though I would say that some of the stuff in the early issues is like at a glacial pace, like the whole how long they just dragged out the egg thing. It's just, but I thought it was like by the 5th one and I realized, oh shit, there's nothing. It's not done. So when are we going to have it's going to end with him going to Lor Santeca, but I mean, I think that we saw most of their interaction in the movie. Well,
I mean, I guess what I will say about issue 6 is that, the egg, the creche, whatever they're called, they gave the information about Gracchus the Hutt to Poe Dameron, but not to Terex, but Terex somehow got there first. And so maybe there's a leak or a mole that they have to take care of. And so it seems like that's the direction that they're heading in. So it's possible once that's cleared up, which could, I don't know how many issues that could take, but once that's cleared up, then maybe that'll just be the end of the series.
Right.
But yeah, so yeah, aside from a few things with the artwork, I've liked the Poe Dameron comic so far. The plot stuff with the egg, I was like, man, this is, like we said, this is taking a little too long, but the artwork's pretty good there. It's gotten a lot better with this prison storyline, and now we'll see where it goes from here, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, I almost feel like sometimes I have to kind of not walk back my opinions, but maybe adjust my expectations about.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm, even though I've had periods in my life where I've read comics and then I'll go, I'm sick of it, I drop it. So I wouldn't even call myself even particularly educated on comics. And I guess there is a certain thing where it's like, well, this is handcrafted art. They haven't come up with a program that just like put the face that you want to make, and then we'll just, tell me what the situation is. So these are real people making art. And it's like, I guess the consistency issue has always been a thing. Even when I was a kid, I would get bent out of shape about it. But then I guess I have to concede.
And the first couple issues of anything, they're still getting their feet under them a little bit. And yeah.
Yeah, I think I need to cut these guys a little more slack. That being said, wait till we get to Star Wars 22. We'll talk about the art on that one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are we ready for Star Wars 22?
Yeah, let's get to it.
So this is the 22nd episode of this Star Wars series.
The last flight of the Harbinger storyline.
It's Jorge Molina, Jason Aaron is the writer, Milla is the colorist. So it's a different crew working on this, and I mean, I guess they're
well. So the quick plot synopsis here.
Yeah,
right.
So you do that for me, please.
The last flight of the Harbinger is the storyline. This is the second issue. The first issue just focused on that Scar squadron of stormtroopers.
Oh yeah.
Here we're back with the Rebel Alliance. You have the Star Destroyer Harbinger that's kind of flying around, I guess, just hanging out, when suddenly a squadron of X-Wings and the Millennium Falcon start attacking it, but they don't try to destroy it. Instead, they just shoot the engine reactor, which leads to some kind of core meltdown. So the crew all abandon the ship, and then the Falcon flies in, and the Rebels basically just take over the ship. They jettison the reactor, which explodes, so the Imperials think that the Star Destroyer blew up, but really it didn't. And the Rebels have stolen a Star Destroyer, except the hyperdrive is fried, so they're just kind of sitting there in space. And the Empire will occasionally send shuttles and ties to do recon, and try to figure out what's happening, and then why all these other Imperial ships are getting blown up when they go into that area. And so that's kind of where we are with the story. Sana is still here. She's flying in the Falcon with Han and Chewie and Leia. You have some echoes of both A New Hope and Return of the Jedi with the taking out the Star Destroyers, or taking out the Death Stars, and visually, the shots of the X-Wings and the Millennium Falcon, flying through this structure with pipes everywhere, and Luke turning off, not using his targeting computer or whatever it was, shooting at a small reactor port. So it's visually and dialogue wise, or the way the action unfolds, it's supposed to be reminiscent of the original trilogy films. So that's what's going on in this issue. Robert, where do you want to go from there?
I mean, it's an interesting story. I mean, it's a very kind of...
Yeah, I'm curious to see where it's going.
It's a very typical... I like the ruse, the idea that, that's a trope in Star Wars, the ruse of him, from Empire attaching to the Falcon, and the idea of them faking the destruction. I mean, it's been done in other things before, and even them taking a ship over in Dark Force Rising, which was when I think when they found the Dreadnought fleet at the end of that, the Zahn book. I mean, I hate to be, after I'm just saying here, I need to understand that this is humans making art. There's just something about the artistic choices of the faces. It's ugh.
Oh yeah. So I mean, the cover looks good to me. There's an opening 2-page spread that looks good, I think. But yeah, Han and Leia in particular look really weird in this issue. And Jorge Molina, the guy who did a lot of the artwork and the penciling, he's done. He worked on issue 21, which looked good, and he's done good work for other titles. Han and Leia look so weird here, and what's the worst of them though is on the back page where it says like, see in the next issue, and it's a shot of them running and their faces. It basically looks like Jorge Molina drew the characters and then either couldn't get the faces right or like intentionally decided, oh, I'll just Photoshop like Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford's faces onto their bodies, except they're at the wrong angle and the wrong size for the neck and shoulders, and it looks bizarre. And Marvel and Star Wars keep sending out that image to like promote the next issue, and it looks awful to me.
But he's not now. Is he the cover artist?
I guess he's not. Yeah, maybe he. That's not on him. Maybe that's not on him. And whoever did the cover for the next issue. But even within the issue, they just, it's off. And all of the things we just said. Sometimes it takes a few issues to get the character under your fingers and really figure out how to draw faces consistently for a character that you're just drawing for the first time. But man, oh man.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the ships look great. I mean, honestly, even the bodies thing, it's just the depiction. I understand that like there's not a lot of challenge for an artist to go in and say, oh, I got to draw Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher. So I can kind of understand that maybe they'd want to do it, but I just something about this kind of
I mean, and certainly, every artist should have their own style, right. And it's fine for, an ongoing title like Star Wars to incorporate different artists with different styles. And so, it may not always look the same, storyline to storyline. That's okay too, but even just like consistency. So there's one panel where it looks like Han Solo has a really long neck, but then the next time you see him, it doesn't look like that. And then the next panel after that, he looks like he has even less of a neck, and he is really small. Like he looks smaller than Carrie Fisher. There's just not a lot of, and Luke I think looks okay throughout this. Like he and most of it's maybe that's just because he's sitting in a cockpit and he only has to draw Luke from like the neck up. Like there are a few shots where
I was gonna say there's one shot of Luke where he just looks like he's going Durr.
Yeah,
he's sitting in the X-wing and he's kind of got a chubby cheeks and he's saying something like, it was like this is Red 5, I'm up next, and he's just kind of got this thing like it looks like this. I don't know, but I mean I'm getting very nitpicky. I mean overall,
but Han and Leia I think is the biggest. Where you just go like, wow, this just doesn't look right.
In this,
it's nitpicky. It's it's early days for his work on this comic. Maybe it'll straighten out.
I mean, he did all the stormtroopers, right? Because I see that.
Yeah, he did the previous issue.
I really liked what he did with those. So it's funny because
he's done good work.
The before. Imperial Admiral, it's like he has almost the guy with the eye patch. It's like he's almost done in kind of a Disney style. And I just don't, it doesn't really work for me. And Sana has the one shot where she is holding off the troopers as they go to run into Chewie and Han and Leia run, and that is like that's a really weird look of her. She almost has like a face like Maz Kanata in the thing, and you're just like, I mean, I don't know if that's maybe that's just he made an artistic choice and he stands by it kind of thing. It's just, I guess when I look at that kind of stuff, it just feels so like, it feels like there's not a lot of like every shot looks posed. I guess that if I could make a real honest criticism aside from my own style, likes and dislikes, I'd say every shot with the people is that everybody looks posed in a kind of a strange way. It doesn't look natural, and I don't even really know how to articulate that.
It looks like each shot is posed to get the maximum dramatic effect for that particular panel. But that just means there's not always a lot of continuity panel to panel, right? Like there's a very dramatic shot of Luke Skywalker, and it's like a low angle shot looking up, and he's standing over the camera essentially, because I keep using film metaphors in comics, but he's standing over the bad guy, and he's sort of standing over the camera, and it's a very dramatic shot, but it's not like connected to anything before or after it. Like, and you don't see panels like that elsewhere, and it's you're right, it feels posed, but in a very kind of static way. Like, he's just there. Like, you don't get a sense that he appeared in that position in a natural way. And like, the gun's maybe a little too big, and
even in that shot you're talking about, like, I mean, is that R2 behind him?
Maybe if it is, then I assume there's like some kind of lighting that makes his black and white and silver color scheme look different.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have 3 rectangles on his front, as far as I.
Yeah,
that's kind
maybe
of like,
it's like it's an astromech droid, whatever. It's a dome and then a can and then legs.
Yeah, it's just I mean, like I said, I don't know what his
right,
what he was going for with it, but it just, it's inconsistent. And I mean, that doesn't necessarily make a bad comic. It's just not. And
again, right, it's early days working on this. It might become more consistent in the next issue or 2 issues after that. Something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely interested in where this is going. It's like, I
assume Scar Troopers will make an appearance and maybe try to infiltrate the Star Destroyer.
If they're not there already.
That's a guess, yeah. So, there will be a showdown there, which could be interesting, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that they're able to kind of take over. They have all those Imperials who kind of just running the ship and everything, and it's like, so none of those guys have guns? They don't really care, but, whatever, that's...
They abandoned the ship. I guess you just need, like, a dozen people to run a Star Destroyer, if that.
Which is hilarious, because there was that whole joke in The Force Awakens that Rey could barely turn on the shields because she's like having to reach over.
The Falcon. Yeah.
But, like I said, it's not a terrible comic. It's just, the art isn't really the kind of, like, Cupid doll face that Leia has, but I mean,
looking forward to what's coming next in this storyline, but this particular issue individually is not
right.
One that I'll probably be coming back to a lot.
So let's do Han Solo number 3.
Yes, Han Solo 3,
which is kind of like the I'm not going to
say... Dragon Void race is still going on.
Yes, they're in a race.
It's a bit talkier than the previous 2, but at the end of Han Solo 2, the Dragon Void racers were on one of the planets that was one of their stops, and then the Empire shows up and tries to arrest everyone because it's dangerous, or it's I don't even know if it's illegal or if it's just dangerous. Something. The Empire's just there to arrest people. So then in Han Solo number 3, the organizers of the Dragon Void race show up, talk the Empire out of arresting people for 2 reasons. They say, one, this race is sponsored by the people who supply the Empire with fuel, basically. And 2, a lot of these racers are going to die anyway, so why not just wait until the end and arrest, like, the 2 or 3 people who are still alive rather than try to arrest everyone. There's some additional mystery. So there's a famous racer, Lu Ray Anno, and this is allegedly her last race, and she has these like glowing ball things that kind of hover around her at all times, and one of them previously kind of attached itself to Han and takes an interest in Han, is just kind of hanging around, and so there are some more hints at what those things might be, or it's clearly something that's going to come back up and be important in some way towards the end. We're just not sure in what capacity. And then, of course, Han and Chewie are doing the Dragon Void race in order to pick up rebel spies. There are a bunch of rebel spies on these different planets. They're being killed off one by one. So they think there's a mole, but they're not sure who it is. So the next rebel spy they picked one up in issue number 2. They pick another one up in this issue. But it turns out at the very end that this spy that they just picked up has an old grudge against Chewbacca, and so the issue ends with he draws his gun, is pointing it at Chewie, and that's how the issue ends. So as we said, there's a little more talking in this one. There's a little bit less action. They do show, this particular leg of the race, but it's a 12-hour long obstacle course, and I think the way they laid it out is really cool. But at the end of the day, it's still like a 12-hour long obstacle race. So there are very few ways that you can make that exciting on a 2-dimensional page. So I thought the layout of it was really effective, but in the end, like, you're still just watching people sitting in the cockpit going like, all right, almost there. You're just seeing them do that. And I will say, in contrast to what we were just talking about with Star Wars 22, I think Han Solo overall, at least so far, has probably been the best looking Star Wars comic that they've issued. Out of all of the different titles, I think this one just looks great.
Yeah.
And I have like nothing to nitpick, no complaints. Like I think it just looks great.
Yeah, this is pretty much. I
don't know how you feel, but that's my perspective.
No, I mean I'm completely into it. I'm liking it. Yeah, I would say that, art wise and story wise, yes, I will admit, it's a little slow and a little bit more even for having it be a race. Mm-hmm. It's a little talky, but it's all right because most of the stuff that they're trying to relate is actually I get the feeling is gonna be important as time goes on. I mean, I love these race kind of I guess I think we joked that this is kind of like the cannonball run of Star Wars.
Yeah, well, I think that's how it was presented. Marjorie Liu, who's the writer, I think she even said like, "Oh, it's going to be like Cannonball Run, but in space." And we were both like, maybe. I don't know how that's going to work. But
it also kind of reminds me of this a little bit of like the old Corman production, Death Race 2000, because it's like there's long scenes at the end of the race where they're all basically all these people that are trying to cut each other's throat on the race thing, or like hanging out at the same spa and like sleeping in the same hotel. And I mean, obviously they're not going that deep with this story, but just that, we get a little bit of this alien. You had said the name of this kind of tall fish.
Blu-ray Anno, I think is that.
Yeah, it's like I really like this kind of like just a little bit of like, okay, well this thing with the lights and stuff. They kind of they explain it without it like making it like these are the creatures from this planet and they're the only like it's
not an egg and crash situation.
Yeah, don't shoot it. It's alive. You'd be a murderer. It's like it's such a simple way of relating information in a clear manner that like, okay, in the context of the 22-page comic, it's like I can process this better. It's like I don't feel
at the same time not explaining everything so that there's still this air of mystery about it that you expect is probably going to come up later, and so you want I want to find out what those things really are.
It's the anticipation of it all. It's and like I said, the art is, way more consistent than anything else. And I enjoy it. Sorry, I'm just kind of lost my train of thought there, but yeah, I mean, it's like this. Yeah. Like you said, it's really hard to portray a 12-hour obstacle course race. I will say that the way that it was done in the idea, it did cross my mind how incredibly tedious having to pay attention to something for 12 hours would be.
Oh yeah.
It's oh God, really?
Like that kind of focus. Cause I think part of it too was, the ships couldn't drop below a certain speed. Like they couldn't just go super slow and carefully. So like they're still going pretty fast and it's still taking them 12 hours to get through all of this floating debris. So yeah, just that amount of focus to like make sure that your speed doesn't dip and that you don't run into anything. Like, yeah, they do. And you can see it in sort of the way that it's laid out. So it's laid out there. The Falcon, it's a 2-page spread. The Falcon's kind of at the lower left, an outside shot of the Falcon. And then it's kind of fans out of these little slices of images. And at first it kind of alternates between Han in the cockpit and the exterior of the ship, and then Han in the cockpit and the exterior of the ship, and so on and so forth. But then once you get to like hour 8, it stays in the cockpit on Han, and it just gets closer and closer up on his face. And so by hour 10, when he's like almost there, you're like, all right, this is like, he has been sitting in that chair concentrating for a very long time. And he is ready for this to be done, but he also knows when he says almost there, he still has 2 more hours of doing that, right? So,
and he still has to have somebody kind of save his ass at the end,
right? And then the next page, it just increasing close-ups, ever closer on his face, and the next page it kind of relieves that dramatic tension by cutting back to exterior of the Falcon, and showing, I guess, some other racer who he doesn't like, he's in a rivalry with. Han saved him in a previous leg, and so now he saves Han by keeping the Falcon up above a certain speed. So the way it's laid out, there's no good way to show a 12-hour race, but it does a pretty good job of even within that context, like building up, showing you everything you need to see and building up the tension between the characters, and then reminding you, like, okay, the ship can't drop below a certain speed, and there's all this debris around, and Leia's watching, and the other rebel spy is in the cockpit, and then there's this guy, and then there's that person, and I think they did a really good job with it.
Yeah, I like, and also for some reason, like when they land on this planet to do repairs, there's these great shots of Han and Chewie with their goggles on, and he's got a cover, which reminds me of the, the deleted sequence from Empire. I mean, from Jedi, where they, after they blow up
he's trying to fix the ship.
Yeah, the sail barge blows up, and then it's Luke and all them, and they're getting onto the ship, and they go, "Hey!" It's because it was one of those things where it's like people have always thought, "Oh God, this is like a real lost nugget of Star Wars." And what if they had actually had this scene, and they'd filmed it, and they had some problems with it, and they decided that
there was supposed to be like a sandstorm scene,
right,
that eventually sort of got into the Phantom Menace, or did it get cut from Phantom Menace too?
There is a sandstorm sequence where they escape to the slave pits or whatever, the slave huts.
Oh, right.
But no, they actually, it's on the Blu-ray and you can watch it now, and it's so funny because it was like one of those things that's been around for, whatever, how many years. Oh, if I could only see what it was like. And it turned out it was like, it's much better in the actual film. It's like the side where it's like, hey kid, thanks, I owe you now. And then it's like, it's over. Instead, it's like this thing, and they're lugging people, and they're yelling, and they would have had to have dubbed everything later, of course, because there's fans. And it's like, oh, why don't you leave your ship there? Anyway, I like that it's kind of a throwback to that.
Yeah. I will say too that, you're right in that it can get a little dialogue heavy at times, this comic.
Yeah.
And not just in the sense that like there's a lot of dialogue, but even people are delivering like a lot, multiple lines of dialogue in one bubble. But once, at least in this issue, once the race starts, there's basically 4 pages that represent this leg of the Dragon Void race, and there's 8 lines of dialogue total. One of them is, and they're off at the beginning, and then the whole rest of the page, there's no dialogue. And then you get to that 2-page spread, and you just have, Leia saying like, oh, that crazy fool. And then, Han's saying almost there a couple times. And then at the end, Han's like, oh, put more power to the engines. And, the other guy showing up says, okay, now we're even. But other than that, they let the art kind of the visuals kind of tell you what's happening without needing that constant like, oh man, I can't believe it's been 6 hours and we're still doing that. Like not every panel needs to explain what's going on there. Like, oh, I can't believe we almost hit that structure. And so I think they do a good job, because the rest of the comic and previous issues have been pretty dialogue heavy. They do a good job of pulling that way back when the Falcon is actually in the race.
Yeah, and I would honestly argue that most of the dialogue is pretty germane to the story. So it's not like
Right.
I mean, that is a problem that we've had in other Star Wars issues where it feels like,
right,
and that's an old school thing where it used to be like they'd actually have somebody would say something and then in the dialogue bubble there'd be an asterisk and then there'd be a rectangle and it said
right,
referring to issue
right.
32
Yeah.
C editor or something like that.
Right.
So they're good with the economy, even when they are chatty. There is a certain economy to it that see, when they overdo that stuff, I feel a little insulted. I feel like I have decent reading comprehension. You don't have to remind me of things that happen 10 panels away, so, but yeah, I do like, and I always complain about cliffhangers, but this one actually kind of works for me. It's just the and I love the shot on the second to the last page where the creature that I just forget the name is watching them walk back to the Falcon and stuff, and like, what's going on? And I thought for a second this was this creature, it's like a cat thing or something. It's not like what is it, a muff tack or whatever that was
right.
I don't think it's the same as the thing in the cantina. So this is a different race that we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
So I mean, it did its job. I want to know what happens next. Like you said, it's if you're going to read one Star Wars title right now, I think Han Solo is the one to beat.
Yeah.
So.
I have a corrections department.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm sure people are yelling at us over their computers. So Darth Sidious was indeed a moon, or however you pronounce that, the same as the character Sand Hill.
Oh,
you were correct.
I was right.
I was incorrect.
The banking clan will approve your apology.
What was that? That was like the weird, like that. I have to like keep going. It's like people always go, "Oh, Phantom Menace, Phantom." It's like Attack of the Clones. Every time I go back to it, I just kind of go like, "What the heck was this?"
Yeah, that movie is such a mess. It really is,
Yeah.
And there are parts of it that are good, but so much of it is such a mess.
And it's like,
or maybe not even good. There are parts of it that are interesting and could have been good.
The only way it could have made it worse is if when that one guy said something about the Techno Union Army, there wasn't like a
right.
like
The Techno Union Army will,
Yeah.
It's almost like when those guys are getting chopped in half by Darth Vader in Revenge of the Sith, you're almost like, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But that's George throwing it against the wall and seeing it sticks. So
yeah.
He's not. He can't hurt us anymore.
Yeah.
So I guess we're probably done for this week.
That's a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for getting all the way to the end of this one, people. If you want to interact with us, best thing is like you can email us at hosts@talkingbirdcast.com. That's host with an S. We're on Twitter at talkingbirdcast. We have a website. It's www.talkingbirdcast.com. If you want to help the show, best way to do it. And we do appreciate, because I know people have been doing it, and essentially you've helped us pay for this month's hosting by using this. So anytime you want to do it again,
appreciate
it. And that would be our Amazon affiliate link, which is www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. And what that does is it's like a pass-through link. It'll take you to Amazon, but what it'll do is anything that you purchase while you're on Amazon visiting through that link, we get a small percentage of that as a kickback. It doesn't cost you anything extra. It's just Amazon kicks back a little bit of what they made off the purchase to us, and it, like I said, it helps offset the cost of hosting a show, a weekly show with two loquacious guys that have a lot to say about Star Wars. So we have hosting can be expensive. Was there anything else that you wanted to say?
No, that's pretty good. I just wanted to make sure
I will say this.
I corrected my mistake. That's really it.
I will say we are now on. This is something that we're kind of experimenting with. Is we are now I think it should be from now on. Every episode should also be on YouTube. So I don't really. Although I had some problem, I couldn't get last week's or 2 weeks ago on, and I don't know why, but it's because I'm old and computers scare me. But I was able to kind of figure it out, so now we'll be available on YouTube. If you're a person who really enjoys consuming things via YouTube, I would just search for Talking Birdcast. Talking Bird, the special edition, and it should show up on your feed if that's how you prefer to consume the show. I think the only thing I would say is I was going to say something about in this show, but I feel like we're out of time. But I will just honestly wish Star Trek a happy 50th birthday. It's 50 years old today. Was the 50th anniversary of the first episode being transmitted on NBC. I love Star Trek, not as much as I love Star Wars, but I would be remiss. I don't think Star Wars could honestly exist without Star Trek. I mean, I think it kind of got people in the mindset of like that, you could have a high-end science fiction show with ideas, although I think Star Trek's more of a show of ideas than Star Wars is, but I think it made people understand that it's financially viable. And in that being said, there probably wouldn't be much of a Star Trek without Star Wars, because when Star Wars came out, It showed people like, hey, there is money in this viable stuff. I mean, I think even William Shatner would concede that Star Wars spearheaded Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which, whether or not you love that movie or not, it did give us, 7 series and, well, not 7. How many series were there? Anyway.
You would know more than I would. I will say, while I've never been huge into Star Trek, I always feel like I should be. And periodically I try to be, and it ends up not taking, but I don't think that has anything to do with the ideas of Star Trek.
So how far did you go down the rabbit hole with Deep Space Nine? How much of that did you watch?
Not very far. Handful of episodes. And there is more about the writing and the production values, which again, on a new show, the first season even really is kind of up in the air, and you have to be patient with it. But I was just I can't.
Yeah,
I can't. I don't have that patience. I have all of these episodes awaiting me with this show, and I just can't put in that time to wait for this to get good.
Yeah, I mean
or wait for this to not bore me.
I get. That's the thing about television. I mean, no matter what people say, I believe that Star Wars is primarily a franchise of the film. And Star Trek is of television, and when they cross the stream, so to speak, it's always a compromise. It's I've never considered the Star Trek films to be even remotely as strong narratively as the TV shows, and no offense to any of the comics artists and stuff, I feel the same kind of the way of Star Wars. It's the movies are really the gold standard of understanding Star Wars, and everything flows from that. But anyway, I thought we'd at least mention that. I could probably talk about Star Trek for have a whole show just about Star Trek, but I won't subject people to that. And I will instead thank you for listening and for Talking Birdcast. I have been Robert Zachary.
And I'm still John Llewellyn.
Again, thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.